Chapter 1. The 30th Birthday Humiliation and the 15 Million Bridge Loan Ultimatum. On the warm evening of my 30th birthday, the golden string lights of Vanderbilt Manor illuminated the manicured gardens in Buckhead, Atlanta. Without warning, a hand clamped around my forearm like a mechanical vice. My father, Calvin Vanderbilt, stepped out of the deep shadows of the ivy-covered veranda. Calvin marched behind his desk and slapped a stack of legal documents onto the polished wood. "Sign this now, Jordan," he commanded, his voice vibrating with the harsh dictatorial tone he used on his warehouse dockworkers. I stepped forward and looked down at the bold heading stamped across the top page: Cross-Collateralization and Asset Pledge Agreement. He wanted me to leverage my two-bedroom loft in the West End to an emergency $15 million bridge loan from First Federal Trust Bank for his failing business, Vanderbilt Global Logistics. I looked up from the paperwork and met his furious gaze with focus. "Absolutely not," I said. "Your logistics company is hemorrhaging cash because you've refused to modernize your shipping routes and upgrade your fleet technology. You run 70-year-old diesel trucks on high-interest commercial credit. I am not putting my only home on the line to patch a sinking corporate vessel." Calvin slammed his fist onto the desk, making the brass reading lamp rattle against the wood. "You owe this family everything," he roared. "My supply chain paid for your food, your private high school, and the roof over your head for 18 years. Right now, our fleet is facing a severe liquidity squeeze from maritime fuel suppliers, and you are going to do your part as a Vanderbilt to save it. You bought that West End loft with money you saved, while living under my roof." "I bought that loft with money I earned working 80-hour weeks as a junior analyst, while living on ramen noodles," I corrected him, my tone level and calm. "You have not handed me a single dollar since the day I turned 18. The jazz quartet abruptly stopped playing. 75 heads turned toward us in unison. Prominent Atlanta businesses, local politicians, and socialites stared in utter silence at the spectacle. Calvin released my wrist and shoved me forward so hard that I had to catch my balance against a marble pillar. "Look at her," Calvin bellowed across the garden, pointing a rigid finger at my face. "Look at this ungrateful disappointment." The guests exchanged shocked whispers, eyeing my simple-and-rack dress. I stood straight, keeping my breathing and calm. I refused to grant him the satisfaction of a visible emotional breakdown. "You think you are so brilliant because you rejected medical school at Johns Hopkins," Calvin shouted for the entire terrace to hear. "You rejected our standing family traditions to tinker on a computer in a freezing loft, claiming you are building some useless tech startup. You are a failure, Jordan. You have always been a failure." My mother, Brenda, stepped forward from the front row of onlookers. She adjusted her $12,000 Valentino silk wrap and looked at me with unadulterated contempt. "Your father is speaking the truth, Jordan," she declared, her voice carrying across the silent lawn. "We gave you every educational opportunity, and you squandered them all to play on a laptop like a delinquent. You are a disgrace to our social standing. There is $500, Jordan," Spencer said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Pick it up, call an Uber, and scurry back to your ghetto neighborhood in the West End. Leave the successful people alone, tonight. You are completely ruining the aesthetic of our donors and our charity partners." Monique giggled, leaning her head against Spencer's shoulder, while several high society guests snickered in agreement. Calvin crossed his arms over his broad chest, his bloodshot eyes locked on mine. He leaned forward until I could smell the stale scotch on his breath. Then, in the dead silence of the garden, he delivered the ultimate blow: "I wish you were never born." The sheer cruelty of the statement hung in the humid Georgia air like toxic smoke. "This is the final time you will ever see me bow my head to your arrogance," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the terrace. Chapter 2. The $50 million hard lock and the Monday bank collapse. At 1:30 on Sunday morning, the city of Atlanta was wrapped in quietness, but my minimalist West End loft was lit by the cool glow of 6 high-definition monitors. I stared at the active liquidity dashboard. Calvin Logistics currently owed 42 separate seniored notes, totaling $50 million. all originating from First Federal Trust Bank and underwritten by Spencer's brokerage firm, Sterling and Vance. I moved my cursor over the red command button labeled Protocol 0, Hard Collateral Lock. I clicked Confirm. At 9 o'clock on Monday morning, the summer sun beat down on the towering glass exterior of First Federal Trust Bank on Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta. Finally, the glass door opened. "Mr. Vanderbilt, please sit down," Thorne said, his voice tight, and "We have a catastrophic development regarding your corporate profile. The $15 million bridge loan underwriting has been terminated effective." Calvin stared at him in utter disbelief, his facening. "What kind of sick of professional joke is this, Marcus? Spencer completed the underwriting last Friday. We have 40 freight vessels docking in Savannah that require fuel disbursement." "It is not a joke, sir," Thorne replied, stepping back toward the doorway. "Less than 8 hours ago, an anonymous private equity consortium holding $50 million of your senior debt executed a hard collateral lock across all your operating accounts. Every corporate credit card, every freight dispatch ledger, and every payroll line has been frozen under Federal Banking Order 409B. You know or possess any verifiable liquid collateral." Spencer slammed both hands onto the glass conference table, the color draining completely from his cheeks. "That is impossible. Iley verified their debt obligations last Thursday." "Who authorized this freeze?" "We cannot disclose the identity of the sovereign creditor due to non-disclosure statutes," Thorne said coldly. "Furthermore, because your corporate credit accounts are now under active legal embargo, First Federal Trust Bank is legally prohibited from extending any further lines to your entities. I must request that you vacate our commercial offices." The interior of Calvin's luxury sedan felt like a suffocating metal box as they drove away from the bank parking garage. Spencer sat in the passenger seat, his heart hammering against his ribs in absolute terror. Desperate to save his own skin, Spencer spun toward his father-in-law and fabricated a venomous lie on the spot. "Calvin, listen to me," Spencer gasped, his voice trembling. "I received a text from a junior compliance officer inside the bank. This wasn't an anonymous equity fund. It was Jordan." Calvin nearly swerved across 2 lanes of Peachtree Street traffic. "What did you say?" Spencer lied, his eyes wide with fake outrage. "She used her little startup computer connections to hack into the bank's public reporting portal. She submitted dozens of fraudulent insolvency reports and fake whistleblower documents claiming Vanderbilt Logistics was bankrupt to sabotage your loan approval out of pure spite for what happened at your birthday party." Calvin slammed his fist against the leather steering wheel with enough force to crack the internal frame. The veins in his forehead throbbed violently. He swallowed the lie whole, because it fit his twisted narrative of his youngest daughter being a bitter, jealous failure. "That ungrateful little viper," Calvin growled, his voice trembling with rage. "I fed her, I clothed her, and she dares to destroy my $15 million lifeline? I will make sure she rots in a jail cell before sunset." Chapter 3. The Forged Power of Ori and the Empty $8.4 million reserve trust. Monique insisted on accompanying her father and husband after Calvin called her from the car, screaming that her little sister had criminally sabotaged the family business. Calvin shoved open the industrial door, but instead of finding his daughter in a cramped room, he slammed straight into the broad chest of a 6'4" private security officer wearing a tactical uniform. "Step aside now," Calvin ordered, pointing a rigid finger toward the interior hallway. "I am Calvin Vanderbilt and I am here to see my daughter Jordan." "Tell her to get out here." The security officer let out a dry, dismissive chuckle. "You are wasting your breath, old man. Miss Vanderbilt moved her entire operational infrastructure out of this temporary holding space 14 days ago." Monique rolled her eyes and stepped forward, waving her manicured hand. "Oh please, which miserable, rodent-infested basement did she crawl into next? Tell us the address so we can serve her with criminal warrants." The officer smirked, adjusting his utility belt. "She didn't crawl anywhere, ma'am. Miss Vanderbilt finalized a cash purchase for the 52-story Sovereign Tower on Peachtree Street in the center of the downtown district. She occupies the top 3 floors, Mr. Vanderbilt, I am calling to notify you that your primary property in Buckhead has been slated for foreclosure seizure, the agent said coldly. When your corporate credit line defaulted at midnight, the cross-collateralization acceleration clauses tied to your $6.2 million mortgage were triggered automatically. You have 30 days to vacate the premises before federal marshals execute a lockout. The phone slipped from Calvin's trembling fingers and clattered onto the cracked concrete floor of the warehouse entrance. Calvin grabbed Spencer by the lapel of his tailored jacket, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Spencer, you have to access the Family Backup Reserve Trust now. Go to Arthur Pendleton's office and wire the entire $8.4 million balance into my checking account. We need liquid cash to make payroll and stop the foreclosure before the banks close tonight. Spencer's eyes darted nervously, but a smug, desperate smile crept across his face. Don't worry, Calvin. I already anticipated we might need emergency liquidity if the bank loan stalled. Spencer popped open his leather briefcase and pulled out a legal-sized document stamped with a golden notary seal. Look at this. It is a comprehensive general power of attorney bearing Jordan's signature. I had my golfing partner at the strip mall notarize a forged copy 3 weeks ago in case we needed to bypass her legal consent to access the reserve funds. Calvin clapped Spencer on the shoulder, his face lighting up with relief. Brilliant work, Spencer. That is why you are my golden son-in-law. Run to Pendleton's office now and our $8.4 million. Spencer practically sprinted to his sports car and drove at 80 miles per hour through downtown traffic until he reached the prestigious law offices of Pendleton & Associates on Peachtree Center Avenue. Arthur, emergency disbursement order, Spencer commanded, leaning over the desk while trying to catch his breath. Calvin Vanderbilt has authorized the transfer of the entire $8.4 million reserve trust into our primary operational account at Sterling and Vance. Here is Jordan's signed power of attorney, authorizing the withdrawal. Execute the wire. I cannot execute this wire transfer, Mr. Spencer, Pendleton said gently. This power of attorney is completely useless. Spencer pounded his fist against the mahogany desk, his face turning crimson. What do you mean it is useless? That is a legally binding document. Execute the wire now or I will have your legal license revoked for breach of fiduciary duty. Pendleton folded his hands neatly over his desk pad and leaned back in his leather chair. Yulee never read the foundational charter of the Cornelius Vanderbilt III Reserve Trust, Spencer. When Cornelius established that fund 25 years ago before his passing, he knew how reckless and irresponsible Calvin and Brenda were. He drafted an ironclad clause stipulating that upon her 28th birthday, Jordan Vanderbilt would become the sole, exclusive beneficiary and trustee of the entire fund. Pendleton leaned forward, his voice dropping into a deadly whisper. Furthermore, Spencer, that account nowhere exists. 3 days ago, Jordan Vanderbilt walked into this office accompanied by her legal team, verified her identity, and legally closed out the Cornelius Reserve Trust. She transferred every single cent of the $8.4 million into her private sovereign holding account. The Family Reserve Fund has zero balance. Chapter 4. The police raid and the country club gala buyout. Spencer drove back to the Buckhead estate like a man possessed, weaving recklessly between lanes of afternoon traffic while cold sweat soaked through his dress shirt. Spencer screeched his sports car into the circular driveway of the mansion, left the door hanging open, and burst through the double mahogany front doors. Spencer threw his leather briefcase onto the Italian marble floor and pointed a trembling finger toward the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the city. Jordan is a grand larcenist, Spencer screamed, his voice cracking with feigned panic. She stole our entire future. I walked into Pendleton's office to execute the wire, but she was already there 3 days ago. She illegally drained every single dollar of the $8.4 million and closed the account. Brenda gasped so that she nearly choked, clutching her diamond necklace with both hands. She stole our emergency reserve. That ungrateful little wretch drained our family money. Monique collapsed onto the white velvet sofa and began weeping uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands. She ruined us, Monique wailed, her cries echoing off the high ceilings. She has always been jealous of my perfect marriage and my social standing. Now she is stealing the money meant for our future children. Calvin's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He kicked an expensive marble side table, sending a porcelain vase smashing against the floor. That is the final straw, Calvin roared. She thinks she can rob her own family and hide behind her startup friends. We are calling Police Captain Miller this second. I want felony grand larceny warrants issued for her arrest before sunset. I want to see her dragged out of that downtown office building in steel handcuffs and thrown into the Fulton County Jail. Less than 45 minutes later, 3 authoritative knocks echoed through the grand foyer of the mansion. Standing on the wide stone portico were 2 uniformed Fulton County Sheriff's deputies, but standing between them was not a detective. It was Jordan. Calvin heard the commotion from the living room and charged into the foyer like an enraged bull, his fists clenched tight at his sides. When he saw Jordan standing calmly between the deputies without handcuffs, his rational mind completely snapped. "You filthy thief," Calvin screamed, lunging across the marble tiles with his fist cocked back, intending to strike his daughter across the face. Both sheriff's deputies stepped forward, placing their bodies between Calvin and Jordan, while resting their hands on their utility belts. "Step back now, Mr. Vanderbilt," the lead deputy commanded in a voice that shook the foyer. "If you take one more threatening step toward this woman, you will be placed under arrest for felony assault on a protected citizen." Calvin froze in his tracks, his chest heaving heavily, as he glared over the deputy's shoulders at his daughter. Jordan did not flinch or blink. She looked at him with eyes as cold and as winter ice, holding complete command of the space. Jordan walked past her father and stepped into the center of the living room. "Read the first page, Calvin," Jordan instructed, her voice calm and "The $8.4 million in the Cornelius Reserve Trust never belonged to your logistics company, and it certainly never belonged to you or Brenda. When grandfather Cornelius died 25 years ago, he drafted an ironclad clause designating me as the sole, lawful beneficiary upon my 28th birthday, because he knew how incompetent and greedy you both were. I simply exercised my legal as sole trustee to transfer my own inheritance into my private holding account 3 days ago. There was zero theft because every penny was legally mine." Then Harrison Vance stepped forward from the doorway, unbuttoning his tailored jacket. He pulled a separate red-tabbed folder from his briefcase and looked at Spencer, who was backing away toward the dining room archway, sweating profusely. "Mr. Spencer," Harrison said with chilling precision, "I hold here a certified forensic handwriting analysis report and an official incident affidavit from Pendleton and Associates. Less than an hour ago, you submitted a forged general power of attorney, bearing Miss Vanderbilt's signature in an attempt to unlawfully siphon $8.4 million across state lines. Under Federal Statute 18 U.S.C., Section 1028, forging a signature on a commercial instrument to access funds exceeding $1 million is a Class B federal felony carrying up to 30 years in prison." The 2 sheriff's deputies turned their attention toward Spencer, their hands unstrapping the leather retainers on their handcuffs. Spencer went completely pale, his knees buckling as he grabbed the edge of the dining archway to keep from collapsing. Brenda shrieked in absolute terror at the thought of her golden son-in-law being arrested inside her living room. She grabbed her cell phone and called State Senator Sterling Spencer's uncle and Brenda's time tennis partner. She wept hysterically into the receiver, pleading for political intervention over what she called a minor clerical misunderstanding. Senator Sterling made a rapid emergency call to the Sheriff's Department watch commander, and after a tense 2-minute phone exchange, the deputies agreed to temporarily pause the on-site arrest pending a formal review by the district attorney's crimes unit. As the deputies stepped back toward the foyer to give the family temporary breathing room, Calvin puffed out his chest, attempting to reclaim his lost authority. He pointed a trembling finger toward the oak doors. "Get out of my house now, Jordan." Calvin roared. You think you have won because you took your grandfather's money. You are still a pathetic, ungrateful failure. Tomorrow night at the Buckhead Grand Country Club, I am hosting our annual $25 million charity gala. Every major banking titan, hedge fund director, and shipping magnate in Atlanta will be in attendance to support my legacy. I will new equity investors, save my logistics network, and make sure your miserable little startup is buried forever. Jordan did not raise her voice to argue with his delusions. She simply turned around and walked out the front doors with perfect, unhurried grace. Once they reached the interior of her black Maybach parked outside the iron gates, Jordan looked across the leather seat at Harrison Vance and smiled a chilling smile. Harrison, she said, contact the board of directors of the Buckhead Grand Country Club now. Offer them $42 million in cash to acquire 100% of the land, the clubhouse, the golf course, and the commercial liquor licenses. Have the closing documents finalized by 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. When my family walks into that ballroom tomorrow evening, I want to legally own every single square inch of marble beneath their shoes. Chapter 5. The emerald dress and the $30 million hostile takeover reveal. Spencer prowled the perimeter of the ballroom, sweating heavily inside his Italian tuxedo as he cornered local venture capitalists near the open bars. Calvin stood near the main entrance receiving handshakes from oblivious shipping magnates, his chest puffed out with supreme arrogance. Suddenly, the double oak doors of the grand ballroom swung wide open. The polite chatter near the entrance died down in an instant, the silence rippling outward across the room like a wave. Calvin's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson the instant his eyes locked onto her emerald dress. He took a furious step forward to order security to eject her, but Monique moved faster. Monique deliberately swerved into Jordan's path, jerked her wrist violently, and splashed the entire glass of chilled champagne down the front of Jordan's pristine emerald silk dress. Monique let out a loud, theatrical gasp of surprise that echoed through the quiet crowd. She covered her mouth with her diamond-ringed hand and sneered. "Oh my goodness! Look at what I did to your only nice outfit, Jordan. You shouldn't have sneaked into an exclusive charity gala for people who actually possess wealth. Why don't you head back to the kitchen and ask the catering staff for some leftover scraps?" The surrounding billionaires shifted uncomfortably, waiting for an explosive confrontation. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the stage microphone clicked on. Spencer rushed up the 3 wooden steps onto the main podium, gripping the edges of the lectern with white knuckles as he tried to project authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests of Atlanta," Spencer announced, his voice echoing through the sound system. Over the past 2 weeks, Vanderbilt Global Logistics has faced minor, external operational challenges caused by envious competitors and bitter, incompetent family members who tried to sabotage our legacy. He glared at Jordan sitting at the center table. The high society crowd murmured, following his gaze. But Spencer raised both hands into the air, pivoting his tone into triumphant jubilation. "However, I am thrilled to announce tonight that our company has not only overcome those petty attacks, but we have finalized a historic $30 million equity merger. A premier private equity fund, named Aegis Nexus Sovereign Capital, has recognized our immense global value and is injecting $30 million in liquid capital into our business tonight." The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Wealthy investors clapped and cheered for the miraculous corporate turnaround. The wealthy crowd parted instinctively. Before her, Calvin's arrogant smile vanished instantly as he realized she wasn't walking toward the exit. 300 billionaires fell into absolute breathless silence. Jordan looked out over the sea of wealthy investors and then turned her piercing gaze onto her brother-in-law. "That was a truly magnificent speech, Spencer," Jordan said, her crystal-clear voice commanding the entire ballroom. "You painted a breathtaking picture of corporate prosperity and family unity for all these wonderful donors tonight. But you forgot to mention one minor detail to our distinguished guests. You forgot to read the ownership profile on that $30 million merger agreement you were so desperate to sign." Jordan raised her left hand above her shoulder and snapped her fingers once. A collective gasp of sheer disbelief shook the entire ballroom. Calvin stared at the giant screen with his mouth hanging wide open. The blood drained completely from his face, turning his skin the color of wet ash. Chapter 6: The FBI Stage Arrest and the 30-Day Eviction. Notice Jordan did not look down at her father struggling to keep his balance against the ruined banquet table. She held the wireless microphone near her lips and turned her piercing gaze back toward the audience. "Distinguished investors and partners of Atlanta," Jordan announced, her voice ringing across the silent room. "Please review the actual merger filings before you celebrate tonight. There is absolutely no $30 million equity injection happening here. For the past 36 months, I have quietly utilized my sovereign fund to acquire every single piece of senior debt, high-interest truck lease, and commercial mortgage that Calvin Vanderbilt has recklessly originated for decades." The crowd listened in stunned, breathless fascination. Calvin Logistics has operated as an insolvent shell company for years, hiding corporate operating losses behind country club memberships and expensive dinners. Jordan continuedly. "The $30 million referenced by my brother-in-law tonight was not a bailout loan. It was the settlement price required under federal bankruptcy codes to completely liquidate Calvin's corporate holding structure. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, Aegis Nexus legally owns 100% of the shipping fleet, every freight terminal, and every commercial route associated with Vanderbilt Global Logistics. This company is officially dead, and I hold the only key to the corporate graveyard." The wealthy investors near the front tables began backing away from Calvin and Brenda, recognizing a sinking corporate vessel they refused to be tied to. Jordan turned slightly and pointed a rigid finger at Spencer, who was now trembling violently behind the wooden podium, sweat pouring down his face. "Furthermore," Jordan said, raising her voice so every person in the back row could hear, "this hostile takeover was effortless because we had an incompetent inside man making catastrophic decisions. When First Federal Trust Bank canceled Calvin's $15 million bridge loan on Monday morning, Spencer was terrified of losing his brokerage commission and facing federal audits for underwriting fraudulent debt." Jordan took 2 deliberate steps toward Spencer. Spencer approached Aegis Nexus begging for emergency liquidity. "He was so blinded by arrogance and greed that he signed our aggressive debt consolidation terms without running them through competent legal review. To $30 million in temporary cash flow, Spencer secretly pledged Calvin's $6.2 million Buckhead estate as cross-collateral. He also pledged my mother's $3.5 million protected retirement portfolio. He blindly signed acceleration clauses stipulating that if Calvin Logistics missed a single debt payment, Aegis Nexus would seize all pledged assets instantly." Jordan looked down at Monique, who had collapsed onto the polished floor sobbing. "Calvin Logistics officially defaulted on its commercial debt obligations yesterday afternoon," Jordan told her sisterly. "Your perfect husband signed away your parents' mansion and every cent of their retirement money to save his own brokerage license." Spencer gripped his styled hair with both hands and began hyperventilating into the podium microphone, his entire world crashing down around him. They surrounded Spencer at the podium. "Mr. Spencer Vance," the lead special agent said in a voice that carried through the open microphone, "you are under arrest by order of the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia. You are charged with 3 counts of federal wire fraud, 2 counts of commercial bank tampering, and 1 count of international money laundering regarding unauthorized offshore transfers to the Cayman Islands." The agents grabbed Spencer's shaking wrists, pulled his arms behind his back, and them in steel handcuffs. Calvin snapped out of his shock and charged toward the stage, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged desperation. "You monster!" Calvin roared at Jordan, pointing a violently shaking finger at her emerald gown. "You have no legal to steal my home and my company. I will hire the top litigation firms in Georgia to sue you for corporate sabotage and malicious theft. I will see you locked in a federal penitentiary." At 9 o'clock the following morning, The Georgia sun cast shadows across the circular driveway of the Buckhead mansion. Jordan walked into the study wearing a charcoal suit, flanked by Harrison Vance. "Read the top heading, Calvin," Jordan instructedly. "That is a 30-day notice of eviction issued by the Fulton County Superior Court. Because your company defaulted on its cross-collateralized loan obligations yesterday. This $6.2 million estate, the surrounding acreage, and every piece of furniture inside nowhere belong to you. They are the legal titled property of Aegis Nexus Sovereign Capital. You have 30 days to pack up your clothing and vacate my premises before federal marshals execute a lockout." Chapter 7: The $450,000 fake pregnancy and the boardroom coup. As Jordan's cold ultimatum echoed through the study, frantic footsteps sounded from the top of the sweeping marble staircase in the grand foyer. Monique stormed into the study and positioned herself between Jordan and Calvin, forcing theatrical tears to stream down her flushed cheeks. She launched into the performance of a lifetime, playing the role of the ultimate tragic victim. "You are killing my baby, Jordan," Monique screamed, rubbing her belly dramatically. "The stress of your malicious corporate attacks is destroying my health. You are trying to murder your own unborn nephew because you are jealous and barren. My innocent first child is going to be born into poverty because of your vindictive greed." Because Harrison had left the front double doors wide open to the street, Monique's hysterical wails drifted out onto the quiet, oak-lined neighborhood. Several wealthy neighbors walking their purebred dogs stopped on the sidewalk and peered curiously through the open entrance. Sensing the audience, Monique escalated her performance. She stumbled toward the foyer archway, pointing a shaking finger at Jordan so the neighbors could see. "Look at this monster," Monique cried out. "She is throwing a heavily pregnant woman and an unborn child out onto the street." Brenda rushed out of the morning room, took one look at Monique weeping on the marble floor, and wrapped her arms protectively around her daughter's shoulders. Brenda turned her furious, tear-stained face toward Jordan and unleashed a torrent of vile curses. "You unnatural barren beast," Brenda screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "You are incapable of finding a husband or carrying a child of your own, so you want to destroy the beautiful family Monique is building. You are entirely dead to me, Jordan. You will burn in hell for what you are doing to an innocent, pregnant mother." Jordan stood still in the center of the study, absorbing the toxic assault without flinching or shifting her stance. She reached inside and retrieved a white-sealed envelope bearing the embossed gold logo of the Atlanta Reproductive and Genetic Center, the most premier private fertility and prenatal clinic in Georgia. "You might want to read those medical files before you purchase any more designer baby strollers, Mother," Jordan said. Brenda frowned, staring down at the embossed medical logo. "What is this? What garbage are you trying to fabricate now?" "When I initiated the asset consolidation of Calvin Logistics last month," Jordan explained, her voice level and crystal, "I ordered a comprehensive forensic audit across all family accounts to track where corporate capital was bleeding out. I discovered a unauthorized withdrawal of $450,000 from your protected retirement savings account over the past 6 months. Brenda, when my forensic accountants tracked the destination of those funds, they discovered the entire truth." Jordan looked into Monique's terrified eyes. "That envelope contains the certified medical records subpoenaed directly from the Atlanta Reproductive and Genetic Center. They prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that Monique is not pregnant. She has never been pregnant." The entire study fell into a sudden, suffocating silence. Monique's safe face turned the color of chalk, her hands slipping away from her stomach. "Let me outline the mechanics of the scam for you, Mother," Jordan continued. "Spencer and Monique were drowning in over $600,000 of secret underground sports gambling debts and leveraged cryptocurrency losses before the logistics collapse. To prevent their bookies and creditors from seizing their assets, Monique went online and purchased falsified prenatal ultrasound templates and fake medical diagnostic sheets." Jordan took one step toward her mother. "For the past 6 months, Monique has worn a silicone belly pad under her designer dresses and faked morning sickness to manipulate your emotional vulnerability. Brenda. She convinced you to liquidate $450,000 of your retirement savings under the guise of purchasing a luxury condo and building a state-of-the-art nursery for your future grandson. Instead, Monique and Spencer took your retirement money and wired it to illegal offshore gambling syndicates in Costa Rica to their debts. There is no baby mother, there is only a greedy parasite who sucked your retirement fund dry. Brenda let go of Monique's shoulders, stepping backward across the rug as if she had been burned by hot iron. Her hands trembled violently as she reached down, picked up the white envelope, and ripped it open. The devastating reality of the ultimate betrayal crashed over Brenda, instantly transforming her maternal grief into explosive, violent fury. Brenda raised her arm and delivered a resounding, brutal slap across Monique's face. Yet instead of turning to Jordan with gratitude or an apology, Brenda's twisted mind pivoted to blame the messenger. She spun toward Jordan with bloodshot eyes and screamed, "Why couldn't you keep your mouth shut? Why did you have to expose this in front of the open doors and ruin our family dignity before the entire neighborhood? You have destroyed the peace of this household." Calvin stomped forward from behind the desk, his chest heaving heavily, as he pointed a shaking finger at Jordan's face. "You think you have conquered me with your freeze, girl?" Calvin growled, his voice with malice. "Even with the bank accounts locked, I still legally possess the majority voting shares on the board of directors of Vanderbilt Global Logistics. I have convened an emergency shareholder voting session at corporate headquarters tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I will rally my 14 senior board members, strip you of your creditor claims, and completely reverse this hostile takeover." At 9:50 the following morning, the hot summer sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 14th floor boardroom at Vanderbilt Logistics headquarters in downtown Atlanta. Calvin gripped the edges of the table and launched into a sweeping, aggressive speech about corporate loyalty, decades of shared profits, and the sacred legacy of their supply chain network. Instead, the 14 senior directors sat uncomfortably still. Jordan walked into the boardroom wearing a striking crimson wool suit that commanded authority. Harrison Vance walked one step behind her, carrying his signature leather briefcase. Jordan sat down, crossed her legs, and folded her hands neatly on the polished oak. Calvin's blood pressure skyrocketed, his face turning purple. "Get out of my boardroom now, Jordan," he bellowed, slamming both hands on the table. "Security, drag this trespasser out of my building." Two burly corporate security officers stepped through the doorway, but instead of grabbing Jordan, they looked at her. Calvin turned to his 14 board members in shock. "Call the police. Someone call the police now." Not a single director moved a finger or reached for a cell phone. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Jordan reached into her briefcase, pulled out a stack of legal binders bound with black clips, and slid them down the center of the oak table until they stopped in front of Calvin. "Your speech about loyalty was touching, Calvin," Jordan said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "But it is entirely irrelevant. Open those files and inspect the updated shareholder registry." Over the past 72 hours, Eiley visited the private homes of all 14 senior directors sitting at this table. Jordan revealed, "Your board members are completely exhausted by your dictatorial temper, your archaic management methods, and your refusal to upgrade our fleet. They are terrified of the personal legal liability tied to your hidden corporate debt." When Aegis Nexus offered them a premium cash buyout for their equity, all 14 directors eagerly signed their voting shares away without hesitation. "I did not need to fight you for your personal shares, Calvin. I simply purchased 51% of the total voting power from your board." Calvin dropped the binder onto the table as if it were burning hot, looking at his time colleagues in profound betrayal. Jordan stood up and buttoned her crimson suit jacket. "As the lawful majority shareholder of Vanderbilt Global Logistics, I hereby call for an vote of no confidence. By the authority vested in this board, Calvin Vanderbilt is officially stripped of his title as chief officer, and terminated from all operational duties effective. A low chuckle began to rumble deep within Calvin's chest. The panic vanished from his face, replaced by a look of calculated malice. He reached into his inner suit pocket, pulled out a slim manila folder, and tossed it onto the table. "You think you are so brilliant, girl." Calvin sneered, flashing his teeth. "You forgot one vital detail about your little startup empire. 6 years ago, when you coded the original algorithmic foundation of Panthera AI, you were living under my roof and using a high-speed computer terminal purchased with Vanderbilt corporate funds." Calvin tapped the manila folder. Under federal intellectual property statutes, any proprietary software developed utilizing corporate equipment belongs 100% to the parent company. I filed a federal copyright infringement and intellectual property seizure lawsuit in the United States District Court. I halved an emergency injunction, placing a total hard freeze across every single bank account, stock portfolio, and server connected to Aegis Nexus. I am going to drag your entire $3 billion empire straight down to hell with me. Chapter 8: The Copyright Lawsuit Trap and the 10-Year Slush Fund Exposure. At 10 o'clock the following morning, the oak doors of Courtroom 4B in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia swung shut, sealing Jordan and her family inside the federal legal arena. Calvin's lead litigator, Arthur Bradley, stepped up to the mahogany podium before Chief Federal Judge Marcus Sterling and launched an aggressive, meticulously rehearsed assault against Jordan. "Your Honor," Bradley argued, his voice booming across the courtroom, 6 years ago, while residing inside the Vanderbilt family estate, the defendant, Jordan Vanderbilt, utilized Vanderbilt Global Logistics' multi-million-dollar mainframe enterprise servers and high-speed enterprise coding licenses to construct the core algorithmic engine of Panthera AI, under well-established federal intellectual property doctrine and established corporate employment covenants. Any digital property constructed utilizing enterprise hardware belongs and entirely to the parent corporation. We respectfully request that this court make the temporary asset freeze permanent and transfer full legal ownership of Aegis Nexus to my client." Calvin nodded solemnly from the counsel table, playing the role of the betrayed father who had generously provided his ungrateful daughter with premier technological resources only to be robbed of his intellectual property. Chief Judge Sterling frowned, flipping through the binder of hardware invoices. He looked down from the elevated bench and fixed Jordan with a stern, questioning gaze. "Miss Vanderbilt, federal copyright law, regarding the utilization of corporate enterprise infrastructure for commercial gain, is exceptionally strict. If these corporate server invoices are verified, this court will have no choice but to uphold the total asset freeze across your holdings." Calvin flashed a wicked, triumphant smile across the center aisle toward his daughter, certain that he had delivered the fatal blow to her independent empire. Before Calvin's grin could settle, Harrison Vance stood up from the defense table. "Your Honor, may I approach the bench and present defense exhibits A through D?" Harrison asked. "Proceed, Mr. Vance," Judge Sterling commanded. Harrison handed the leather dossiers to the judge and plugged the encrypted flash drive into the courtroom presentation terminal. "Your Honor," Harrison began, his crystal-clear voice commanding absolute attention, "the narrative presented by Mr. Bradley is not merely false, it is a blatant, calculated fraud perpetrated upon this federal court. Please direct your attention to the immutable cryptographic timestamps displayed on the monitors. They prove with absolute, verifiable technical certainty that Miss Vanderbilt did not write a single line of Panthera AI source codes utilizing Vanderbilt corporate servers or enterprise software licenses." Harrison walked toward the jury box, gesturing to the screen. "The digital registry confirms that Miss Vanderbilt coded the foundational architecture of Panthera AI entirely from scratch on a $150 refurbished Lenovo ThinkPad laptop. Furthermore, the cryptographic geolocations confirm that she compiled every line of that code between the hours of 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning inside a non-heated, 500-square-foot loft on Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard, 3 months after Calvin Vanderbilt had cut off her college tuition and thrown her out of his home. Harrison turned toward Calvin's high-priced legal team, his eyes locking onto Arthur Bradley. "Now let us examine the binder of hardware invoices, Mr. Bradley submitted to this court 5 minutes ago. If Your Honor will look at tab 4 of Defense Exhibit B, you will find a certified letter from the Chief Manufacturing Officer of Cisco Systems Enterprise Hardware." Harrison paused, letting the silence stretch before dropping the hammer. "That letter confirms that the server hardware serial numbers listed on Mr. Vanderbilt's invoices belong to enterprise blade servers that Cisco Systems did not even design, manufacture, or release to the public until 18 months ago. The invoices submitted by the plaintiff claiming server utilization 6 years ago are complete, undeniable fabrications created on a laser printer inside Mr. Vanderbilt's study 48 hours ago to commit fraud upon this court." The smug smile instantly vanished from Calvin's face. The blood rushed out of his cheeks as Chief Judge Sterling's head snapped up from the documents, his eyes burning with absolute judicial fury as he glared down at Calvin's trembling legal team. "Mr. Bradley," Judge Sterling roared, leaning over the bench, "are you aware of the severe statutory penalties for submitting fabricated commercial invoices and suborning perjury inside a federal district court?" Arthur Bradley began stammering, his hands shaking violently as he rapidly backed away from Calvin's table. "Your Honor, my firm relied entirely on the documentation provided by our client. We had no prior knowledge. Sit down now, counselor, before I hold your entire legal team in criminal contempt." Judge Sterling bellowed. Harrison Vance did not stop his relentless legal assault there. He stepped back to the defense table, picked up a 500-page forensic accounting ledger bound in red leather, and placed it onto the judicial bench. "Your Honor, since my client, Aegis Nexus Sovereign Capital, legally completed the acquisition of Vanderbilt Global Logistics last Friday, we have gained absolute statutory access to 10 years of internal unedited accounting archives. What our forensic auditors uncovered goes far beyond civil copyright fabrication." Harrison opened the red binder to a section highlighted in yellow. This ledger details a 10-year, systematic corporate tax evasion and offshore capital diversion conspiracy orchestrated by Calvin Vanderbilt and his wife, Brenda Vanderbilt, for 96 consecutive months. Mr. Vanderbilt deliberately recorded phantom fuel expenses and artificial fleet depreciation across his corporate tax returns to evade federal commercial income taxes. Harrison pointed to a secondary flowchart displayed on the courtroom monitors. Simultaneously, Mr. Vanderbilt siphoned $14.2 million of that untaxed corporate revenue into a secret, numbered Swiss bank account at UBS Zurich, account number 884-9102 Teach, registered under Brenda Vanderbilt's maiden name, Brenda Sterling. The plaintiffs have utilized this illegal offshore slush fund for a decade to purchase luxury sports cars, pay country club dues, and fund their lifestyle without paying a single cent to the Internal Revenue Service. Calvin began sweating profusely, his hands gripping the mahogany table so tightly that his knuckles turned stark white. He gasped for air as the devastating reality of his total exposure crashed over him. Chief Judge Sterling picked up his wooden gavel and slammed it down against the sounding block with a violent crack that shook the courtroom. "The plaintiff's motion for a preliminary asset injunction is hereby denied and dismissed with extreme prejudice," Judge Sterling declared, his voice ringing with finality. "This court will not tolerate blatant perjury, forged documentation, or vexatious litigation designed to harass a legitimate corporate entity." Judge Sterling gathered the 500-page tax ledger and the forged hardware invoices into a neat stack and looked down at Calvin. "Furthermore, by the statutory authority vested in this federal bench, I am ordering the transfer of Defense Exhibits C and D directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service and the United States Attorney's Financial Crimes Task Force. I recommend that Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt retain competent criminal defense counsel because federal warrants will likely be executed before the close of business today." Calvin gasped, clutching his chest as a wave of absolute crushing panic paralyzed his lungs. Chapter 9: The Penthouse Begging, the Smear Campaign and the Media Buyout. At 7 o'clock that evening, the setting sun poured golden light through the 20-foot, floor-to-ceiling glass walls of Jordan's private penthouse on the 52nd floor of Sovereign Tower. The brushed steel elevator doors slid open, and Brenda stepped into the penthouse foyer. Brenda walked across the polished concrete floor, her eyes darting nervously around the magnificent penthouse that dwarfed the scale of her lost estate. "Jordan, please," Brenda wept, reaching out with trembling, sweating hands to grab the hem of Jordan's cashmere sweater. "You have to show us mercy. You have to stop these federal agents." Less than 2 hours ago, armed IRS criminal investigators served warrants at the house and seized Calvin's passport and records. "If those tax evasion charges proceed, your father will spend the rest of his life in a maximum security federal prison." Brenda looked up, pouring every ounce of pathetic maternal manipulation into her tear-stained face. "I know we made mistakes, Jordan, but we are your biological parents. Blood eyes are than water, you came from my womb. You cannot allow your own mother and father to be dragged into federal prison and thrown out onto the street. Please, sign the cancellation orders, withdraw the IRS accounting ledgers, and return the deed to the Buckhead mansion. If you give us back our home, I swear we will change. We can finally be a loving, united family again." Jordan did not move a single muscle as her mother wept on the rug. She looked down at the woman clutching her sweater and felt absolutely no anger, no sadness, and no pity, only complete detachment. Jordan reached down, took Brenda's wrists, and peeled her trembling fingers off the white cashmere one by one, without any gentleness. She took 2 deliberate steps backward, creating a boundary between them. "Save your theatrical performance, mother," Jordan said, her voice devoid of any human warmth. "Your fake tears are completely wasted in this penthouse. You want to talk about biological blood and maternal love? Let us revisit the evening of my 18th birthday." Jordan fixed her mother with a piercing gaze. "Do you remember that night, Brenda? Calvin cornered me in the kitchen because I asked him to sign my aid verification forms for Johns Hopkins Medical School. He ripped my application into pieces in front of me and called me a worthless, parasitic mistake who would never amount to anything. And where were you, mother?" Brenda flinched, her eyes darting toward the floor. "You were standing by the marble kitchen island, leaning against the counter and sipping a $200 glass of Pinot Noir." Jordan continued. "You watched your husband verbally destroy your 18-year-old daughter, and you did not utter a single word in my defense. You chose your luxury sports cars, your diamond necklaces, and your country club status over protecting your own child from monstrous abuse. Enabling abuse through silence and cowardice is identical to throwing the punches yourself." Jordan crossed her arms over her chest. "Sacred blood ties are not a free pass for decades of relentless psychological torture. Mother, I am not drawing from the federal tax ledgers, and I am certainly not returning the deed to the mansion. You and Calvin are facing federal prison because you stole $14.2 million and committed tax fraud out of pure, unchecked greed. You are experiencing the natural, unavoidable consequences of your own criminal actions. I owe you zero mercy today because you showed me zero grace when I was starving in a freezing loft." The instant Brenda realized her crying performance had failed to penetrate Jordan's armor, the fake tears stopped abruptly. "I knew you were a cold-hearted, unnatural monster," Brenda spat, her eyes narrowing into venomous slits. "If you refuse to play ball and hand over our property, then we are going to burn your entire reputation to ashes alongside us." Brenda reached deep into her designer handbag, pulled out a yellow file folder stuffed with loose documents, and slammed it down onto the glass coffee table with a thud. "Do you know what is inside this folder, Jordan? I spent the entire night meeting with a private investigator from WGN Atlanta Broadcasting. This file contains 36 fabricated witness affidavits, falsified logs, and doctored digital photographs." Brenda stepped forward, her voice dripping with toxic triumph. "Tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock I am handing this dossier to the chief investigative reporter at WGN Atlanta. We are running an exclusive primetime exposé framing you as a master fraudster. We are going to tell the entire state of Georgia that you own the seed capital for Aegis Nexus by sleeping with corrupt, elderly politicians and blackmailing banks. We will paint your $3 billion fund as an illegal Ponzi scheme built on bedroom favors and stolen corporate data. Brenda crossed her arms, a wicked grin stretching across her face. You know how much the media loves a corporate sex scandal, Jordan. By noon tomorrow, your name will be absolute garbage. The Securities and Exchange Commission will open federal investigations into your funds. Your wealthy investors will pull their capital in a panic, and your precious sovereign tower will collapse. Now you have until midnight tonight to wire $10 million into my Swiss account and transfer the Buckhead Mansion deed back to Calvin, or I will destroy your life forever. Jordan stared at the yellow folder on the coffee table. Then she threw her head back and let out a melodic burst of laughter that echoed off the 52nd floor glass walls. Brenda frowned, completely confused as to why her world-ending blackmail threat was being met with amusement. What is so funny to you, girl? Jordan walked casually across the rug to her sleek media console, picked up a silver remote control, and pointed it toward the 85-inch 4K flat-screen television mounted on the concrete wall. The anchor at the news desk was speaking with extreme excitement while a red breaking news banner scrolled continuously across the bottom of the screen. The glowing, metallic corporate logo of Aegis Nexus completely filled the screen behind the news anchor, confirming that the entire broadcasting network had been purchased outright 48 hours ago. Jordan paused the television, locking the image of her own corporate logo on the screen. "Please, go ahead, Mother," Jordan saidly. "March down to the WGN Atlanta Broadcasting Studio tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. Hand your fabricated blackmail folder to the chief investigative editor. Let us see if my newly acquired employees will dare to publish a filthy, defamatory smear campaign against their own billionaire chairman and sole equity owner." The absolute magnitude of Jordan's power crashed down onto Brenda like a concrete block. Chapter 10, The Rental Truck Departure, the dark-tinted window and the chosen family 30 days later. The iron gates of the Buckhead estate stood wide open to the morning sun, but every trace of high society luxury had vanished from the grounds. The arrogant shipping tycoon who had once intimidated boardroom directors and shouted curses across garden parties looked haggard, weak and entirely defeated. Brenda followed closely behind him, dragging 2 plastic trash bags filled with off-rack clothing. Her blonde hair was unstyled, her face pale and drawn as she complained bitterly about the heat and the unfairness of their situation. Before they even reached the rear bumper of the rental truck, the 3 of them began arguing viciously on the driveway. Through the open window of the yellow rental truck, a portable radio broadcasted the midday legal news across Atlanta. Monique flinched at the sound of her husband's prison sentence, realizing that her golden investment broker was gone, and she was now moving into a cramped, moldy one-bedroom apartment in South Atlanta with her toxic indicted parents. 50 yards down the quiet, oak-lined street, a sleek black Maybach 680 sat idling silently near the curb. She sat still inside the air-conditioned cabin and watched the absolute collapse of the people who had terrorized her throughout her childhood and told her she would never amount to anything. Calvin turned his head toward the street. Calvin took 2 shaky, hesitant steps toward the street, his hand lifting slightly as if he wanted to approach the vehicle, perhaps to beg for one final scrap of mercy or offer a pathetic, 30-year-late apology for wishing she was never born. Jordan did not shift her posture. Her face remained completely blank, projecting 0 anger, 0 hatred, and 0 sadness toward the broken man on the driveway. Jordan held Calvin's desperate gaze for one final second. Then she calmly reached down and pressed the chrome switch on the armrest. The armored tinted windowly rolled back up, clicking into the seals and completely severing her from their toxic world forever. Jordan leaned back into the plush leather seat and spokely to her driver. "Take me home to Sovereign Tower, Marcus." The powerful Maybach pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the ruined family choking on exhaust fumes as they faced their bleak future entirely alone. 6 months later, on the crisp afternoon of Thanksgiving Day, the interior of the Buckhead estate bore no resemblance to the oppressive mansion Calvin had ruled. A 24-foot solid oak dining table stretched across the center of the grand dining hall, covered in a magnificent traditional Thanksgiving feast featuring roasted turkey, sweet potato purees, fresh cranberry reductions, and vintage French wines. She looked down the length of the table and did not see a single toxic blood relative anywhere in sight. Her chief technology officer, Dr. In the 6 months since the eviction, Jordan had integrated Calvin's former logistics infrastructure into Aegis Nexus, utilizing her autonomous AI dispatch algorithms to out the corruption and transform the fleet into a profitable, green energy supply chain network. Jordan Hadley allocated $20 million in liquid capital to establish a permanent educational endowment, providing full-ride tuition, luxury campus housing, and direct mentorship for underrepresented young Black women pursuing advanced degrees in artificial intelligence and quantitative finance. Jordan picked up her silver dessert spoon and gently tapped the rim of her crystal wineglass. The melodic chime rang through the dining room, and her 20 guests quieted down, turning their smiling faces toward their leader. Jordan stood up, holding her crystal glass of vintage Bordeaux. She looked around the table at the wonderful human beings who had protected her, valued her mind, and stood beside her when she had nothing. To new beginnings, absolute sovereignty, and the unstoppable power of our chosen family. Jordan toastedly, her voice warm and her guests raised their glasses high, clinking crystal across the oak table with enthusiastic cheers. Jordan took a slow sip of her sweet wine, looking out through the glass walls at the sun, setting over her estate. When the blood relatives who are supposed to protect and love you unconditionally choose their own pride, greed, and arrogance over your basic human dignity, walking away is never a failure. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation and self-respect. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family environment, or stand up to arrogant relatives to build your own independent success, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Share your own story of resilience with our community, hit the like button, and subscribe to our channel for more empowering audio fiction stories where justice is always served.